At 1217 in the morning, my oldest son called from a blocked number and said 8 words that made no sense until 5 minutes later. "Dad, hide in the attic right now. Hurry." Before I could ask Ethan what was happening, the line went dead. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence as if it might explain him. Then headlights swept across my bedroom wall. A vehicle rolled slowly into my driveway, stopped without shutting off its engine, and someone inserted a key into my back door. Not forced the lock, not broke the glass. Used a key. I was 68 years old, widowed, retired, and living alone in a house I had owned for 32 years. I should have called the police. Instead, I obeyed my son. Before I tell you why, stay with me. Because the people entering my home were not strangers, and what they came to steal was not something I could replace. My name is Walter Hayes. For most of my adult life, I designed electrical control systems for hospitals and manufacturing plants across central Ohio. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, precise, and useful, which suited me. My wife, Caroline, used to say I trusted blueprints more than people, because wires rarely lied about where they were going. She died 4 years before that midnight call, after 29 months of ovarian cancer that took her body slowly and her patience hardly at all. Since then, I had lived in our 2-story brick house outside Columbus, surrounded by objects that still carried her fingerprints: the blue ceramic bowl by the front door, the chipped measuring cup she refused to throw away, the cedar chest under our bedroom window. I had 2 sons. Ethan, 39, worked for the FBI out of Cincinnati. Ryan, 34, owned a struggling residential renovation company. I loved them both, but not in the same way, and that difference had shaped our family more than I admitted. I reached the hallway just as the back door opened below me. My knees were not what they had been, but fear can lay an old man's speed. The attic stairs folded down from the ceiling at the end of the hall, and I pulled them open as quietly as I could. I carried my phone, a small flashlight, and Caroline's walnut walking stick, though I knew a stick would not help against anyone determined to hurt me. The attic smelled of insulation, dust, and cold wood. I climbed behind stacked Christmas decorations and a row of plastic bins filled with Caroline's clothes. Through a narrow return vent near the floor, I could see part of the upstairs hallway and hear voices traveling up the stairwell. First came the soft thud of shoes. Then a woman whispered, "Keep your voice down." I recognized Melissa, Ryan's wife. A second later, I heard my younger son answer, "I know where he sleeps." That sentence hurt more than anything that followed. Ryan had always been the child who needed rescuing. When he was 9, I rebuilt his science project the night before the fair because he had forgotten it. When he was 16, I paid for the damage after he backed Caroline's car into a neighbor's fence. At 28, he launched Hayes Restoration with more ambition than experience, and I invested $180,000 because I believed a father should back his son when the bank would not. When a hospital renovation went bad, I loaned him another $90,000. When his daughter was born early and the bills piled up, I covered them without being asked twice. I called those choices love. Caroline called them interference. You keep saving him before he learns what drowning feels like. She once told me I had dismissed that as worry. From the attic, listening to Ryan search my house in the dark, I finally understood she had been trying to warn me. A third voice joined theirs downstairs. Male and calm. The office first. We need the hard drive, the original trust documents, and the medical power of attorney. I knew that voice too. Graham Pike had been my financial advisor for nearly 7 years. He had helped reorganize my accounts after Caroline died and prepared a summary of the family trust. I had ended our relationship 18 months earlier, after he began pressuring me into investments I did not understand. Hearing him inside my home at midnight changed the shape of the danger. This was not Ryan panicking over another unpaid contractor. This was organized. They moved into my study below the attic, opening drawers, sliding folders across the desk, testing the handle of the steel safe built into the wall. Melissa asked, What happens if he wakes up? Graham replied. Then you tell him Ryan came to check on him. He's confused enough that no one will question it. Ryan said nothing. His silence told me he had heard that plan before. I nearly climbed down then. Every instinct in me demanded that I confront them, turn on every light, and ask my son, what kind of man entered his father's home like a thief? My hand was already on the attic ladder when my phone vibrated. Ethan had sent a message, "Do not reveal yourself. They need to believe the house is empty." Beneath it came another record. Everything. I switched on the voice recorder and set the phone beside the vent. Below, Graham asked Ryan for the safe combination. Ryan said he did not know it because I had changed it after Christmas. Melissa answered, "He changed it after he started getting suspicious." My fingers tightened around Caroline's walking stick. Suspicious of what I had noticed. Small things over the previous months. Papers shifted in my desk. A bank alert I did not recognize. Melissa asking oddly specific questions about my passwords, but I had blamed grief, age, and my own distraction. That was the habit of a man who preferred doubting himself to doubting family. Graham opened a laptop. I heard the startup chime, then the quick tapping of keys. "The emergency petition is ready," he said. "Once the evaluation is filed, Ryan can request temporary control. The court may grant 10 days before a full hearing." Ryan's voice cracked. "He's not incompetent." Melissa replied in a tone so patient it sounded rehearsed. "Nobody said he is. We only need the court to believe he cannot manage the assets safely right now." Ryan said, "That sounds like the same thing." She reminded him that Hayes Restoration owed $680,000 across equipment loans, supplier balances, and a line of credit personally guaranteed by both of them. She said the bank would seize their house, the company would collapse, and creditors could question where money had gone. "Your father has more than enough," she whispered. "He would rather watch us lose everything than admit Ethan was always his favorite." That accusation was cruel, but not completely invented. Ethan had never required much from me. He earned scholarships, kept his promises, and entered federal service without asking for help. I had praised his discipline and assumed he knew I was proud. Ryan demanded more attention, more money, more forgiveness, and I gave it because his failures frightened me. In trying to protect the weaker son, I made the stronger son feel unseen and the weaker one feel entitled. Caroline had recognized that imbalance long before I did. After her funeral, she left each boy a handwritten letter. Ethan kept his sealed for almost a month before reading it. Ryan read his in the parking lot, cried, and asked me whether she had mentioned money in mine. I should have confronted what that question revealed. Instead, I told myself grief made people behave strangely. From the attic, I understood that I had spent decades translating warning signs into excuses, because excuses allowed me to remain the generous father instead of becoming the honest one. A drawer slammed below. Melissa said, "Here it is." Paper rustled. Graham told her to photograph every page. Through the vent, I could see only part of the hallway, but a reflection in a framed mirror gave me a narrow view into the office doorway. Melissa held a cream-colored envelope with the name Hayes Family Revocable Trust printed across the front. It was not the original document, only a summary. But she smiled as if she had found a buried deed. Graham said the trust was worth approximately $2.3 million, including investment accounts, insurance proceeds, and my remaining shares in Midwestern Control Systems. He explained that once Ryan obtained temporary authority, the house could be listed and the shares liquidated. Ryan asked. "What about Ethan?" Graham answered. "He will not interfere. His own office is reviewing his conduct." I stared at my phone. Ethan had never mentioned an internal review. For the first time that night, I wondered whether his warning had been meant only to protect me. Melissa told Ryan that after the house sold, they would move the money into an asset management company and pay the creditors quietly. Ryan said, "Dad wanted the girls' college accounts protected." Melissa's reply came cold and immediate. "The girls need a home before they need college." Graham warned them to stop arguing and find the medical power of attorney. He said the original had to disappear before the capacity evaluation scheduled for the following week. That was the first I had heard of any evaluation. No doctor had called me. No court notice had arrived. Yet apparently strangers were preparing to decide whether I could manage my own life. Ryan asked whether they could postpone. Melissa said, "No. Graham already arranged the report." The word arranged stayed with me. A medical conclusion should be reached. Not arranged. The engineer in me began sorting facts beneath the fear-hidden evaluation. Emergency petition. Access to my accounts. An advisor I had fired. And a son too frightened to stop his wife. Then Melissa walked upstairs. I saw her shadow stretch across the hallway below my hiding place. She entered my bedroom, opened drawers, and moved into the bathroom. A minute later, she returned holding a small amber prescription bottle I had never seen. "This goes in the medicine cabinet," she said. Ryan followed her and whispered, "What is that?" Graham answered from the stairs. "Something that supports misuse of medication. Take a picture after you place it." Ryan said, louder now. "No, that was not part of this." Melissa turned on him. "Neither was bankruptcy. Neither was losing the company. Neither was your father refusing to help after everything you did for him." I almost laughed at the reversal. Ryan had mowed my lawn twice that summer and driven me to one medical appointment. I had financed his adulthood, yet in her version, he had served me and I had abandoned him. Ryan did not agree, but he did not remove the bottle either. That was the moment my last excuse for him died. My phone vibrated again. Ethan wrote, "Can you see what they planted?" I typed back, "Prescription bottle. Not mine." His answer came immediately, "Photograph it after they leave. Do not touch without gloves." The language was professional, controlled, almost impersonal. I wanted my son to tell me he was coming. I wanted him to say police were outside, that this nightmare had limits. Instead, he treated me like a witness in one of his cases. Below, Graham warned that they had 5 minutes before a patrol car made its regular pass through the neighborhood. That detail told me they had planned the timing. Melissa gathered the photographed documents. Ryan stood in my bedroom doorway and looked around slowly. For 1 second, his face turned toward the attic stairs. I could see him clearly in the hall mirror. His expression was not greedy. It was terrified. I almost called his name. Then he turned away and followed his wife downstairs. They searched the kitchen before leaving. I heard cabinets open, a chair scrape, and Graham say, "If he asks about the petition, you act surprised. He will accuse people. That helps us," Melissa replied. "And if he calls Ethan," Graham paused before saying, "Ethan has reasons to stay quiet." Again, that phrase suggested a second betrayal I could not yet see. The back door closed. Their vehicle rolled away with the lights still off. I remained in the attic for several minutes, unable to trust the silence. My whole body shook, not from cold, but from the effort of remaining still while my son helped prepare the theft of my life. When I finally climbed down, the house looked almost unchanged. That was the ugliest part. The chairs were upright. The family photographs remained on the wall. Caroline's blue bowl still sat by the door. Betrayal had entered without breaking anything visible. I put on disposable gloves from the garage and photographed the pill bottle where Melissa had left it. The label bore my name, a local clinic I had never visited, and a sedative prescribed 3 weeks earlier. In the study, the safe was scratched around the keypad. Files had been returned in the wrong order. The trust summary was missing. I checked the office computer and found it awake despite knowing I had shut it down before bed. A login history showed access to my investment portal shortly before midnight. I tried opening the account, but my password no longer worked. When I called the automated bank line, the system reported a recent security change requested from a recognized device. Recognized device meant someone had used a computer or phone already approved under my identity. Melissa had helped me set up mobile banking after Caroline died. I had given her access because passwords felt unimportant compared with funeral arrangements. 4 years later, that trust had become a weapon. At unu chasse. Ethan finally called again. He asked whether they were gone, whether I was hurt, and whether I had preserved the recording. I answered each question, then asked the only one that mattered. "How long have you known?" He was silent long enough to confirm the answer before speaking. I knew Ryan's company was connected to suspicious transfers. I did not know they planned to come tonight until a source contacted me. I asked why he had not warned me sooner. Ethan said the information was part of an active financial fraud investigation, and he was not assigned to it because Ryan was family. That is not an answer. I told him, "It is the reason," he replied. He promised to explain in person, but he sounded like an agent managing exposure, not a son speaking to a father who had just hidden above his own bedroom. I told him to send me everything he could legally share. 2 minutes later, a secure link appeared on my phone. It contained screenshots of 6 transfers from my brokerage account over the previous 6 months, totaling $97,000. Each transaction carried my electronic authorization. I had approved none of them. The funds moved through 2 consulting companies before reaching an entity called Morrow Creek Holdings. The registered mailing address belonged to a post office box near Dayton. Graham Pike had approved the transactions. The final beneficiary information listed Melissa Hayes as the managing member. I sat at my desk, holding Caroline's walking stick across my knees, remembering every holiday dinner Melissa had hosted, every birthday card signed, "Love," every time she had called me Dad. Then Ethan sent one more message. I read it twice, hoping I had misunderstood. I had not. It said, "Dad, Ryan isn't the only one who betrayed you." Ryan arrived at 9 the next morning carrying 2 coffees and wearing the same navy jacket I had seen in the hallway mirror 6 hours earlier. He smiled when I opened the door, but his eyes moved past me, checking the house before they settled on my face. "You look tired, Dad." I took the coffee without drinking it. He asked whether I had slept well, whether I had heard anything strange, whether I had remembered to lock the back door. Each question sounded casual, but together they formed an examination. I told him I had dreamed about someone walking upstairs. His hand tightened around the cardboard cup. "Probably the pipes," he said. "Old houses make noises." I watched my son stand in the home I had helped him enter the world from, calmly rehearsing a lie. Part of me still wanted to make it easier for him. That instinct disgusted me almost as much as his deception. I led him into the kitchen and asked whether he had spoken to Graham Pike recently. Ryan looked down as he removed the lid from his coffee. "Not in years." The answer came too quickly. I said Graham's name again, slower this time, and mentioned the trust documents missing from my office. Ryan frowned with practiced concern. "Dad, are you sure they were there?" He suggested I may have moved them after Caroline died. He reminded me that I had misplaced my car registration the previous month. That was true. I had put it in the wrong drawer while replacing my insurance card. A small mistake, ordinary at my age, now returned as evidence against me. "You're under stress," he said. "Maybe we should have someone help organize things." I asked whether he meant Melissa. Ryan did not answer directly. He said, "She worries about you." I thought of the pill bottle in my bathroom and said, "I'm beginning to understand how much." Melissa arrived 20 minutes later without knocking. She carried a bakery box and wore a cream sweater that Caroline once told her brought out the warmth in her face. I had always admired Melissa's ability to enter a room as if she belonged there. That morning, I finally saw the calculation beneath it. She kissed my cheek, asked whether I had eaten, and opened the curtains without permission. "You need more light," she said. Then she began building her case, one memory at a time. She mentioned the afternoon I had left my truck running in the driveway, the Christmas card I had mailed twice to the same cousin, and the morning I called my granddaughter by Caroline's name. Each event was real. None proved incapacity. Yet Melissa arranged them so gently that even I could hear the story she wanted others to believe. Ryan sat quietly, allowing his wife to turn my grief and age into symptoms. I asked them both whether someone had scheduled a medical evaluation for me. Ryan's head snapped toward Melissa. "She recovered first." "What makes you ask that?" I said. An automated reminder had appeared on my phone. It was a lie, but not a reckless one. I needed to know whether they believed I had seen anything. Melissa placed one hand over mine. "Walter, families sometimes arrange wellness assessments when they're concerned." Her voice had the careful softness people use around frightened animals. "It isn't punishment." I withdrew my hand. "You arranged it without telling me." Ryan said they had discussed it after I became angry about missing paperwork. Melissa added that people experiencing cognitive decline often resisted evaluation because they could not recognize the changes themselves. That sentence closed the trap neatly. Any objection became proof. I understood then why Ethan had told me not to confront them. They had prepared an explanation for every natural reaction. At 11, a county vehicle stopped in front of my house. A woman named Denise Porter introduced herself as an investigator with Adult Protective Services. Someone had reported that I was neglecting medication, making unsafe financial decisions, and living in a home with electrical hazards. The last accusation was almost insulting. I had spent 42 years designing systems more complicated than anything inside that house. Denise was polite but observant. She asked whether I knew the date, the president, my bank's name, and the amount of my monthly income. I answered each question. Then she asked to see my prescriptions. Melissa guided her toward the bathroom before I could intervene. The amber bottle sat exactly where it had been planted. Denise photographed it. I explained that it was not mine. Melissa looked at Ryan with pained concern and said, "This is what we've been afraid of." Ryan lowered his head. He could not look at me. Denise did not accuse me of anything, but she wrote down every word. When she left, she said the county might recommend a formal capacity assessment and temporary financial safeguards. I stood in the doorway watching her car disappear while two neighbors across the street pretended to examine a mailbox. By noon, the story had already begun moving through the neighborhood. Ryan had told people I was struggling. Melissa had likely told them more. My reputation had never mattered to me in the way wealth mattered to Graham or control mattered to Melissa. But dignity is different from pride. Dignity is the right to stand in your own driveway without people wondering whether you should be allowed to go inside alone. That morning, they took the first piece of it. I wanted to call Ryan back and tell the whole street what he had done. Instead, I remembered the phone recording upstairs and remained silent. After they left, I called my brokerage firm. The representative placed me on hold, returned, and said several account functions had been temporarily restricted because a family member with documented concerns had requested fraud prevention measures. I asked which family member. She said she could not disclose that information without a written request. I asked whether $97,000 had left the account. She became cautious and transferred me to a supervisor. The supervisor confirmed there had been multiple authorized distributions but would not discuss details until my identity was re-verified. When I offered to come to the branch, he suggested I bring a trusted relative. That phrase struck me harder than it should have. Within 12 hours, strangers had begun treating me as though I required supervision. The theft was no longer hidden. It was becoming administrative, stamped, filed, and protected by procedures designed to help people like me. I made my first serious mistake at 2 that afternoon. I drove to Hayes Restoration without telling Ethan or Margaret Sloan, the attorney who had handled Caroline's estate. Ryan's company occupied a converted warehouse near the interstate, with 3 white trucks parked outside and a faded sign over the loading bay. Inside, half the desks were empty. A receptionist told me several crews had been sent home because payroll was delayed. I found Ryan in the conference room with 2 suppliers. When he saw me, he dismissed them and closed the door. I placed printed copies of the transfers on the table. Explain Morrow Creek Holdings. His face lost color. He asked where I had obtained the documents. I said that was not his concern. My money is my concern. I told him, my name on forged transactions is my concern. You entering my home at midnight is my concern. Ryan stared at me for 3 seconds, then reached for his phone and set it face down on the table. I did not notice that he had activated the recorder. He said Melissa handled most of their financial restructuring because he was overwhelmed. I asked whether she also handled planting medication in my bathroom. Ryan's expression tightened. You're confused. I slammed my palm against the table. The sound echoed through the glass room. Do not call me confused. Employees outside turned to look. Ryan stepped back and said, "This is exactly what we've been trying to prevent." That sentence broke my control. I accused him of theft, cowardice, and using my dead wife's trust to cover his failures. He did not deny the transfers. He only repeated that I was upset and needed help. By the time I left, I had given him a clean recording of an angry old man making accusations in a workplace. Melissa used it before sunset. She sent an edited portion to Denise Porter and attached it to the emergency guardianship petition as evidence of volatility. Margaret called me after receiving notice through the county filing system. "Tell me you did not confront him alone," she said. I told her the truth. She exhaled in the exhausted manner of someone watching a patient reopen his own wound. Margaret had known Caroline for 20 years and never softened bad news. She ordered me to meet her at a diner near Worthington. "Not at her office. Assume they are watching your routine," she said. "And Walter, stop trying to win this by being louder. They are building a file. Every angry word becomes another page." I knew she was right. But knowing did not remove the humiliation. My son had invaded my house, and I was the one being warned to behave carefully. Margaret arrived with a leather folder and no appetite. She reviewed the transfer records, photographs, and audio from the attic. The recording captured enough to establish unlawful entry and discussions about my assets, but several sections were muffled by insulation and distance. She explained that Ohio probate courts could grant emergency guardianship when credible evidence suggested immediate risk, though a full hearing and medical evaluation would follow. "Ryan does not control anything yet," she said, "but if they get temporary authority, they can freeze access, redirect correspondence, and argue that every step is protective." I asked whether we could file criminal charges immediately. Margaret said we could report the break-in and financial theft, but doing so before preserving the digital trail might cause Graham and Melissa to destroy accounts or blame everything on Ryan. "You need patience," she told me, "not passivity. Patience." For a man who had spent his career fixing failures the moment alarms sounded, that distinction was difficult. She examined a copy of the trust summary and pointed to a recent amendment attached to the guardianship petition. It named Ryan as successor financial agent if I became incapacitated. My electronic signature appeared at the bottom. I had never seen it. Margaret compared it with older documents and said the signature image was genuine, likely copied from a legitimate file. More troubling was the authentication stamp. It showed the amendment had been signed from an approved device inside my home network. Someone had not merely forged my name. They had used access I had personally granted. I remembered Melissa sitting at my kitchen table after Caroline's funeral, setting up two-factor authentication while I stared at condolence cards. She had asked for my recovery email and created passwords because I could not focus. I thanked her. I even told Ryan how lucky we were to have someone practical in the family. My grief had opened the door, but trust had left it unlocked. Margaret advised me to obtain an independent cognitive assessment immediately. She contacted Dr. Helen Morris, a geriatric psychiatrist with no connection to the family, and scheduled testing for the next morning. She also told me to document every conversation, make no large transfers, and avoid changing the locks until we understood whether Ryan had legal access through any older agreement. "Let them believe you are uncertain," she said. "People who think they are winning become careless." I disliked the strategy because it required me to appear weaker than I was. Yet weakness was already the costume they had chosen for me. Perhaps I could use it. I returned home, placed the trust documents in a bank deposit box, and left ordinary folders in the office. I backed up the attic recording to 3 separate drives and mailed one to Margaret by overnight courier. For the first time since the call, I stopped reacting and began observing. That evening, Ethan texted a location instead of coming to the house. We met in the rear parking lot of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, beneath a security light that flickered every few seconds. He looked older than he had at Thanksgiving. His suit was wrinkled, and a pale line marked where he had removed his wedding ring. Though I knew he and his wife were still together, he handed me a folder containing corporate records, loan documents, and a list of payments tied to Ryan's company. Ethan explained that a federal investigation into mortgage fraud and falsified contractor invoices had identified several small construction firms used to move money. Hayes Restoration appeared in 3 transactions. Because Ryan was his brother, Ethan had been removed from direct involvement. "Then how did you get this?" I asked. He said a colleague had warned him unofficially. I heard the missing part immediately. Ethan had continued looking after being told not to. He admitted he had followed the financial trail for nearly 4 months. During that time, he learned Graham had created shell companies and Melissa had signed property documents under Morrow Creek Holdings. I asked why he had not warned me the day he discovered my account was involved. Ethan's jaw tightened, because I needed to know whether Ryan understood what he was doing. I said, "You needed evidence." He did not deny it. I accused him of treating the family like a case file. He answered that if he had confronted Ryan too early, the entire network would have vanished. And if I had been drugged or declared incompetent while you waited, I asked. Ethan looked away toward the church wall. For all his training, he had no prepared response. His silence was another kind of confession. I asked about Graham's statement that Ethan's office was reviewing his conduct. Ethan told me Internal Affairs had questions, because one transfer connected to the investigation had entered a college savings account belonging to his daughter. He had not requested the money and froze the account after discovering it. But he delayed reporting the connection for 9 days while trying to determine the source. 9 days, I repeated. He said he had been afraid the appearance of a family benefit would end his career. In those 9 days, he had searched records he was not authorized to access. That was why he had warned me from a blocked number and why he could not send agents to my house. He had information, but not clean authority. I understood then that Ethan's 8-word command had contained both courage and self-protection. He handed me one final document, a copy of the emergency petition Ryan had filed. Attached were affidavits from Melissa, 2 neighbors, and a preliminary medical opinion signed by Dr. Calvin Ross. I knew Ross. He was the neurologist who had treated Caroline during the final year of her illness, when tumors affected her balance and speech. He had never examined me, spoken to me as a patient, or reviewed my medical history. Yet the report described progressive memory loss, impaired judgment, medication misuse, and paranoid fixation on financial theft. It recommended immediate supervision. The language was polished, specific, and devastating. Margaret had warned me that lies become dangerous when mixed with familiar facts. This report used details from Caroline's illness, details Graham could have accessed while managing her estate, and reassigned them to me. I called Dr. Ross's office from the parking lot. His receptionist said he was unavailable and could not discuss patient records. I told her I was not his patient. She paused, then transferred me to voicemail. Ethan asked whether I recognized the signature. I did. Ross signed with a narrow capital C and a long final stroke beneath his name. The signature looked authentic. That meant either a respected physician had joined the conspiracy or someone had obtained a legitimate signed page and attached it to a false report. Both possibilities were worse than what I had believed that morning. The midnight break-in had not started the betrayal. It had been one step in a process already moving through banks, clinics, neighbors, and courts. Someone had spent months building a version of Walter Hayes that looked confused, unstable, and dangerous. Now that invented man was beginning to replace me in official records. When I returned home, a courier envelope waited against the front door. Inside was formal notice of a capacity evaluation scheduled for the following Tuesday, and a hearing on temporary guardianship 2 days later. Ryan's name appeared as petitioner. Melissa's signature appeared as witness. Dr. Ross's report was listed as supporting evidence. I stood beneath the porch light reading the pages while curtains shifted across the street. My whole life had been reduced to checkboxes selected by people who claimed to love me. I wanted to tear the petition in half. Instead, I carried it inside, photographed every page, and placed it beside Caroline's blue bowl. Then I called Margaret and said, "I'm done giving them reactions. Tell me how to make them believe I'm losing." She answered, "First, we find out who wrote that medical report." Neither of us yet understood that the answer would connect the theft to something planned almost a year earlier. Dr. Calvin Ross returned my call at 7:30 the next morning, and his first sentence changed the direction of everything. "Mr. Hayes, I have never evaluated you." His voice was clipped, professional, and irritated in the way physicians sound when paperwork threatens to become scandal. I told him his signature appeared beneath a report describing my memory loss, paranoia, and misuse of medication. For several seconds, I heard only the soft tapping of a keyboard. Then he asked me to email the document to a secure address. 20 minutes later, he called again. The signature was his, but the report was not. Nearly 2 years earlier, Graham Pike had asked him to sign a general medical certification connected to Caroline's estate and an insurance dispute. Ross remembered the form because Graham had insisted it was urgent. "The page you sent me was built around that signature," he said. "Someone attached it to a fabricated assessment. The lie had not begun with my health. It had begun with my wife's death." Margaret arranged for Dr. Ross to provide a sworn statement, but she warned me that one forged report would not automatically destroy the guardianship case. Melissa had neighbors, an adult protective services visit, the planted prescription, and the recording from Ryan's office. "They built layers," Margaret said. "We have to remove them one at a time." She came to my house with a digital forensics consultant named Leon Burke, a former bank security analyst who treated computers the way I once treated malfunctioning electrical panels. He imaged my desktop, router, and phone without changing the original data. By noon, he found an email account created under my name 3 months after Caroline died. I had never used it. The recovery phone number belonged to Melissa, and the backup email belonged to Morrow Creek Holdings. Every authentication code for the disputed transfers had passed through that account. Someone had designed a second version of my identity and quietly taught the banks to recognize it. Leon traced the $97,000 through a chain of companies with names vague enough to sound legitimate: Northvale Consulting, Harrow Administrative Services, and finally Morrow Creek Holdings. The money did not disappear into Ryan's payroll, supplier debt, or mortgage. It helped purchase a commercial property outside Dayton, a tired strip center with 6 storefronts and 2 vacant units. County records listed Morrow Creek as the buyer. Melissa Hayes appeared as managing member, while Graham Pike appeared as registered agent. Ryan's name appeared nowhere. That discovery forced me to reconsider the story I had told myself. I had assumed my younger son was stealing from me to rescue his company, and that Melissa was pushing him because she feared losing their home. But the stolen money had created an asset Ryan did not legally own. Whatever Melissa had promised him, she and Graham were building something separate. Ryan was not the architect of the scheme. He was one of its tools. Margaret obtained additional public filings showing that Melissa had refinanced the Dayton property using projected lease income and a personal guarantee signed electronically in Ryan's name. She had also purchased a professional liability policy covering herself as manager of Morrow Creek. The policy excluded intentional fraud but offered legal defense for negligent financial management. "She is preparing for the moment everything collapses," Margaret said. In another filing, Melissa had opened a post office box in Nevada and registered a second asset company there. The dates mattered. She began that process 6 weeks before Ryan signed the guardianship petition. If the court gave Ryan control over my trust, he would authorize transfers, sell the house, and appear responsible on every page. Melissa would move the proceeds, claim she acted on her husband's instructions, and protect whatever she could under companies he did not control. I had believed she wanted to save their marriage. The documents suggested she was preparing to survive it. Ryan still carried responsibility. His signature appeared on the petition. He had entered my house, searched my office, and watched Melissa plant the bottle. Yet the more records we found, the clearer his motive became. Ryan had received a notice of default on the company's line of credit and a warning that his personal guarantee could lead to foreclosure on their home. 2 major clients were withholding payment over disputed work. Graham had told him that temporary control of my assets would allow a short-term bridge loan, after which the money could be restored. Melissa reinforced the lie by showing him selected trust pages suggesting Ethan would inherit the majority if I died. The full trust divided assets equally, subject to conditions for the grandchildren. She had removed pages and turned my son's oldest wound into leverage. Ryan was not innocent. He simply chose a comforting lie because the truth required him to admit his company was beyond saving. The deeper betrayal surfaced when Leon found an encrypted folder on the old external drive Ethan had been so desperate to protect. The folder contained screenshots, transaction maps, and internal case notes dating back 4 months. Ethan had documented nearly every company we had just uncovered. He knew about Morrow Creek, the Dayton property, and the false recovery email. He also knew that one transfer had passed through his daughter's college savings account before moving onward. The money remained there for less than 48 hours. But the routing created the appearance that Ethan's household had benefited. His notes showed he discovered the transfer almost immediately and froze the account. What he did not do was report it at once. Instead, he spent 9 days using restricted databases to identify the source, hoping to prove the deposit was a trap before his supervisors saw it. He had tried to protect his career by controlling the order in which the truth appeared. I called Ethan and told him to come to the house. He arrived after dark and stopped in the foyer when he saw the encrypted folder open on my laptop. "You accessed that?" he asked. I said, "It was stored in my house, alongside evidence involving my accounts." He looked toward the windows, lowered his voice, and asked whether anyone else had seen it. That question answered more than an apology would have. I told him Margaret and Leon had reviewed the files. Ethan pressed both hands against the back of a chair and said, "I had compromised an internal matter." "No," I replied. "You compromised an internal matter when you kept evidence hidden because you were afraid of embarrassment." His jaw tightened. "It was not embarrassment. It was my career." I looked at him and said, "That is what important people call embarrassment when they believe their position deserves a better name." He admitted he had known the shell companies connected back to Melissa for months. He said he delayed warning me because he needed to determine whether Ryan was knowingly involved. And because any open accusation could alert Graham, I asked whether he had known someone was constructing a guardianship case. He said not until 2 weeks earlier, when a confidential source mentioned falsified medical records and a planned search of my home. "You had 2 weeks," I said. Ethan answered that he was trying to verify the threat before frightening me. I laughed once, without humor. "You decided how much truth I could handle. Your brother decided how much money I deserved to control. You both reached the same conclusion that my life belonged in younger hands." Ethan's face changed then. For the first time, he stopped defending procedure and looked like my son. "I was trying to protect you," he said. I answered, "So was Ryan." According to Ryan. The argument ended when Margaret placed Caroline's old letters on the kitchen table. I had shown them to her earlier while searching for trust records. She had not opened them, but she knew what they represented. Caroline had written one to each boy before her final hospitalization. I remembered how differently they received them. Ethan waited nearly a month before opening his because he feared losing control. Ryan opened his immediately and searched it for reassurance. I had rewarded both patterns. I praised Ethan whenever he hid pain behind competence, and I rescued Ryan whenever fear became failure. One son learned that mistakes must be concealed. The other learned that consequences were temporary if he sounded desperate enough. Sitting between legal files and my wife's handwriting, I saw my part in the machinery. I had not caused their choices, but I had helped build the habits that made those choices possible. That realization did not make me forgiving. It made me precise. I told Ethan he would provide Margaret with every lawful record he could share and disclose the rest to his supervisors himself. He objected that an immediate report could cost him his assignment and possibly his position. I said, "Then you will finally experience what you expected Ryan to face." He flinched, but he nodded. I called Ryan next and asked him to meet me alone at a park near his office. He arrived looking exhausted, with dark circles beneath his eyes and sawdust still clinging to his jacket. I did not accuse him. I told him I was tired, frightened by the evaluation, and considering letting him handle the finances temporarily. Relief crossed his face before shame covered it. That moment confirmed the strategy Margaret and I had discussed. People reveal themselves when they believe resistance has ended. Ryan said he never wanted the matter to become hostile. He claimed the guardianship was temporary and promised no property would be sold without discussing it with me. I asked whether he had seen the complete trust. He said Melissa had shown him enough to understand that Ethan would eventually control most of it. I told him that was false. Ryan stared at me, then looked away. I could see him trying to decide whether I was manipulating him or whether his wife had. I did not show him the Dayton property records. Not yet. Instead, I said I might agree to a family settlement if all assets and debts were listed in one room. With Margaret present, Ryan immediately said Melissa would approve. I asked why Melissa needed to approve a conversation between father and son. He had no answer. Before he left, he said, "Dad, I'm trying to keep my family together." I told him, "So am I. We may not be talking about the same family anymore." The plan was simple enough to appear harmless. I would attend the scheduled capacity evaluation, avoid emotional confrontation, and allow Ryan to believe temporary control was within reach. Margaret would demand a complete accounting before any voluntary agreement. Leon would preserve every digital request and login. Ethan would report his conflict, even if doing so removed him from the investigation. The goal was not merely to prove I was competent. It was to make Melissa and Graham continue moving while they believed I was too weakened to understand. If they attempted to transfer assets, sell property, or obtain the hidden drive, their actions would create evidence stronger than any argument I could make. I disliked pretending to be confused, but Margaret reminded me that they had already cast me in that role. "You are not surrendering your dignity," she said. "You are letting them underestimate where you placed it." The danger arrived sooner than expected. Melissa came to my house the following evening with soup, fresh bread, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She said Ryan had told her I was ready to cooperate. I allowed my shoulders to sag and asked her to explain the evaluation again. She sat close beside me at the kitchen table, speaking slowly, as if each word needed time to reach an aging mind. She poured iced tea from a pitcher she had brought and encouraged me to drink. The first glass tasted slightly bitter, but I blamed the lemon. Within 20 minutes, the room began tilting at the edges. Melissa's voice sounded distant. I remember trying to stand, touching the table for balance, and seeing her phone rise to record me. She said, "Walter, you're frightening me." I tried to answer, but my tongue felt too large for my mouth. Then the floor moved upward. I woke beneath fluorescent lights with a blood pressure cuff around my arm and Ryan sitting beside the hospital bed. He told me I had become disoriented and nearly fallen. Melissa had called an ambulance. A physician asked whether I sometimes took more medication than prescribed. I said I did not take the sedative found in my bathroom. He looked at Ryan before writing something on his chart. My blood test showed a benzodiazepine class drug. Though I had no prescription for one, I asked that the sample be preserved and demanded the result in writing. The doctor seemed surprised by my clarity, but the earlier observations remained slurred speech, confusion, poor balance, agitation. Melissa had created the medical event her false report predicted. By morning, the hospital record had become another official page supporting her version of me. Truth was moving slower than paperwork, and for the first time, I understood how thoroughly they might win before anyone looked closely. Margaret arrived before discharge and insisted that I say nothing more without her present. She photographed the toxicology result and asked the hospital to retain the blood sample. Ryan stood near the window, pale and silent. I asked whether he had seen Melissa pour the tea. He said no. Then he added, "She was trying to help." I looked at him until he lowered his eyes. Whether he believed her or feared her no longer mattered. His silence continued doing her work. Margaret informed us that Melissa had already filed the hospital record with the probate court and requested emergency temporary guardianship. The judge could rule from the documents before the scheduled hearing. "They are accelerating," Margaret whispered after Ryan left. "That means Graham suspects you are collecting evidence." I asked how much time we had. She said perhaps hours, not days. The order arrived at 4:20 that afternoon. For 10 days, Ryan Hayes was granted temporary authority over specified financial matters, including the power to communicate with banks, restrict large transactions, and secure property pending a full hearing. The judge did not declare me permanently incapacitated, but the practical result was immediate. My brokerage login stopped working. The bank placed an administrative freeze on outgoing transfers. A property management notice appeared in my email stating that any proposed sale or refinancing would require Ryan's authorization. My own son could now stand between me and assets I had spent 40 years earning. Melissa had manufactured a crisis, then used the crisis to obtain legal control. I sat in Margaret's office reading the order while rain struck the windows. For the first time since the attic, I felt something close to defeat. Ethan called while I was still there. He had reported the college account transfer and his unauthorized searches. Internal Affairs suspended him from active duty pending review. He said it without self-pity. But I heard the fear beneath his control. Ryan's company was collapsing. Ethan's career was at risk. My accounts were frozen. Melissa and Graham had pushed each of us into separate corners and made secrecy seem safer than trust. Margaret asked whether I wanted to challenge the temporary order immediately. I looked again at the 10-day window and realized it could become our advantage. If I fought now, Melissa might stop moving. If I appeared frightened and compliant, she would hurry to convert temporary authority into permanent control. No emergency appeal, I said. Margaret studied me carefully. What are you proposing? I folded the order and placed it inside Caroline's old leather folder. I'm going to let them think they finally broke me. That night, I returned home under instructions that Ryan would oversee my financial mail. The lock on my office door had been changed. My debit card sat in a sealed envelope with a note saying it was temporarily restricted for my protection. On the kitchen counter, Melissa had left another pitcher of tea. I poured it down the drain, rinsed the glass, and stood in the dark listening to the house settle. The world I had known had collapsed exactly as Ethan's midnight warning promised. But beneath the wreckage, I could finally see its structure. Melissa wanted control. Graham wanted money. Ryan wanted rescue. Ethan wanted to preserve the image of competence. Each of them believed my weakness would protect what they valued most. I picked up my phone, called Margaret, and said, "Prepare the family accounting. I'll sign whatever makes them come into the same room." She asked whether I was certain. I looked toward the attic and answered, "Yes. This time, I want them to believe I've surrendered." Ryan moved into my house the next morning as though the temporary order had turned him into both son and landlord. He arrived with a locksmith, a canvas overnight bag, and a folder labeled Care Plan in Melissa's handwriting. The locksmith changed the office door, the basement storage room, and the cabinet where I kept tax records. Ryan apologized each time the drill bit caught the wood. "The court says I have to secure financial materials," he explained. I asked whether the court had ordered him to sleep in my guest room. He looked embarrassed and said Melissa thought supervision would reassure everyone. I nodded as if the explanation made sense. Then I asked where my checkbook was. He told me he had placed it in the office for safekeeping. I thanked him. The relief on his face was almost painful. He mistook cooperation for surrender because that was what Melissa had trained him to see. I began playing the role they had written for me. I asked Ryan what day the hearing was, then asked again an hour later. I called the television remote my phone and laughed at myself before he could react. At breakfast, I stared too long at a spoon and asked whether Caroline had bought the silverware. Ryan answered softly that she had been gone 4 years. I let the information settle across my face like a fresh wound. The performance disgusted me, but it produced results. By lunch, he was texting Melissa from the hallway instead of stepping outside. By evening, he stopped lowering his voice during financial calls. People conceal plans from enemies. They explain plans around furniture. I had become furniture. From the living room, I heard him tell Graham that I was declining faster than expected. Graham answered through the speakerphone, then moved before Sloan requests another evaluation. Ryan looked toward me. I pretended to be asleep. Margaret prepared a voluntary family management agreement designed to look generous and harmless. It stated that I would consider transferring limited authority to Ryan if every asset, debt, insurance policy, property interest, and related company were disclosed at a formal accounting session. The agreement did not grant control. It required transparency before any decision. Melissa read only what she wanted to see. She called me that night and praised my maturity. "This will keep everything private," she said. "No one wants your personal life argued in court." I answered slowly, allowing uncertainty into my voice. "I don't want the girls embarrassed." She assured me the grandchildren would be protected. Then I asked whether Graham could attend because I trusted his experience. There was a brief pause. "Of course," she said. That was the first hook. The second came when I mentioned an external hard drive containing old account records and Caroline's insurance files. I said I believed it was stored in a bank safe deposit box. Though I could not remember which branch, the hard drive existed, but it was no longer in a bank. Leon had copied its contents weeks earlier, and Margaret stored the original in her office safe. My mention of it was bait. If Melissa and Graham believed the drive contained proof of the transfers, they would reveal how far they were willing to go to obtain it. The following afternoon, Ryan asked casually which bank Caroline had preferred. I told him I thought it was First Franklin on High Street, then corrected myself and said perhaps the Westerville branch. He wrote both names in his phone. Later, I heard him arguing with Melissa in the kitchen. "You said there wasn't another copy," he whispered. She answered. "I said we didn't find one." Ryan asked what would happen if the drive showed Morrow Creek. Melissa told him Graham could explain the transfers as temporary asset protection. Ryan said, "My name isn't even on Morrow Creek." The silence after that question lasted long enough to become its own answer. Melissa recovered quickly. She told Ryan the company had been placed in her name because his credit was damaged. She said wives protected families by holding assets creditors could not easily reach. Ryan asked why Graham was registered agent and why the Dayton property had never appeared in their household accounts. Her voice sharpened. "Because you could not keep your company alive long enough to qualify for anything." I sat in the adjoining room with a newspaper open across my lap, hearing the balance of their marriage shift. Ryan had spent years believing Melissa was the practical one who cleaned up his mistakes. Now he was beginning to understand that she had built her security from those mistakes. He entered the living room afterward and asked whether I had ever seen paperwork for Morrow Creek Holdings. I looked confused and said the name sounded like a retirement community. He watched me carefully, then nodded. For the first time, he did not report my answer to Melissa. The consequences outside the house continued to spread. Hayes Restoration missed a second payroll. 2 crew supervisors resigned, and a supplier filed suit over unpaid materials. Ryan spent hours on the phone promising money he no longer controlled. One afternoon, his 10-year-old daughter called him crying because another student had said her grandfather was crazy and her father was a thief. Ryan took the call on the back porch. Through the glass, I watched his shoulders collapse. When he returned, I asked whether Emma was all right. He said children repeated what adults whispered. I answered, "So do court records." He flinched. I did not comfort him. That was new for both of us. Every part of me wanted to say I would fix the school problem, the payroll, the mortgage, and the fear in his daughter's voice. Instead, I let him remain inside the consequences he had helped create. Ethan's suspension became public within his office before it reached the family. He called from his car and said Internal Affairs had removed his access to case systems, collected his badge, and instructed him not to contact anyone connected to the investigation. He sounded calm until he asked whether I believed he would lose his job. I told him I did not know. That is all he said. I reminded him that for years I had answered uncertainty with money, influence, or reassurance. This time, we both live with not knowing. He was silent, then said he had delivered the remaining lawful records to Margaret and provided a full account to his supervisors. I told him that mattered more than whether the admission saved him. Before hanging up, he said, "Dad, I'm sorry I waited. It was not enough to repair us, but it was the first sentence he had offered without defending himself." Melissa came to the house that evening, carrying groceries and a new medication organizer. She placed it on the counter and began sorting vitamins into labeled compartments, as if performing for an invisible jury. I thanked her and asked whether she would help me find the safe deposit key. Her hands stopped for half a second. "Where did you last see it?" I said. Caroline kept important keys in a blue ceramic bowl near the front door. Melissa glanced at the bowl, then resumed sorting. That night, the motion sensor in the hallway recorded her searching the bowl, the coat closet, and the drawer beneath the telephone. She never found the key because there was no relevant key to find, but the video showed intent. Leon had installed a new camera inside a smoke detector with my consent before the temporary order. Margaret had confirmed that recording activity in my own home was lawful under the circumstances, though audio rules required greater care. We collected only what we could use. The next morning, I discovered the older office camera missing. Its mount had been ripped from the wall, and the local storage unit in the basement had been smashed with a hammer. Melissa stood beside Ryan and said perhaps I had damaged it during an episode. I looked at the broken plastic and answered, maybe I did. She smiled gently, believing I had accepted another piece of her story. What she did not know was that the system uploaded encrypted copies to an external server whenever motion was detected. Leon had recommended that design after the attic incident. The destruction itself became evidence, though it also warned us that Graham was suspicious. Margaret called and told me to reduce direct contact. They are looking for surveillance now, she said. Do not assume every device remains hidden. I glanced at Ryan, who was standing in the hallway staring at the broken camera. His expression suggested he had not known Melissa planned to destroy it. Graham visited that afternoon with documents for the family accounting. He wore a charcoal suit and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to explaining other people's money. He greeted me warmly, asked about my health, and avoided looking at the scratched safe. On the dining table, he arranged summaries showing my trust, house, investment shares, and retirement accounts. The documents looked complete until Margaret's earlier checklist taught me what was missing. Morrow Creek Holdings, the Dayton property, the Nevada entity, and the disputed transfers. I asked whether all family-related assets were included. Graham said yes. Ryan looked at Melissa. She looked back without blinking. I signed nothing. Instead, I asked whether the hard drive might clarify old insurance records. Graham's fingers tightened around his pen. He said outdated drives were unreliable and sometimes corrupted. Better not confuse the court with incomplete data, he advised. The fear beneath his professionalism was visible now. After Graham left, Ryan followed him to the driveway. I opened a window upstairs and heard part of their conversation. Graham said they needed access to the safe deposit box before the hearing. Ryan asked whether the temporary order allowed it. Graham replied that Ryan could request entry as financial guardian, but the bank might notify Margaret. Then don't request it formally, Melissa said, joining them. She suggested using my identification and signature card. Ryan refused. I'm not impersonating him. Melissa reminded him he had already signed the guardianship petition and entered the house. You don't get to grow a conscience halfway across the bridge, she said. Ryan answered, maybe the bridge goes somewhere you never told me. Their voices dropped before I heard more. Still, the exchange mattered. Ryan was no longer merely afraid of losing the plan. He was afraid of what the plan actually was. That night, he entered my room without knocking. I was sitting beside Caroline's cedar chest, holding the old photograph of Ryan at age 11 after a bicycle accident. In the picture, he had a bandaged chin and one hand wrapped around mine. I asked whether he remembered it. He said I had driven through a thunderstorm to reach the emergency room because Caroline was out of town. I told him I also sold my restored 1,967 Pontiac that summer to pay debts from a contract dispute I had hidden from the family. You thought I sold it because I got bored. I said, I sold it because I had made a bad business decision. And your mother told me you boys should not carry the cost. Ryan asked why I was telling him. I answered, because I taught you the wrong lesson. I made sacrifice invisible, so rescue looked free. His eyes filled, but he did not cry. I added, I will not rescue you from this. He asked whether I planned to send him to prison. I told him I did not control that outcome. He said Melissa believed the money could be returned once the company recovered. I asked whether he still believed her. Ryan looked toward the door before answering. I don't know what I believe. I told him that uncertainty did not erase what he had done. He had signed a false petition, entered my home, and watched evidence being planted. Fear explains a choice, I said. It does not make the choice disappear. Ryan sat on the edge of the chair and admitted Graham had prepared documents transferring proceeds from my house into the Nevada company. He had not seen them until that morning. He suspected Melissa intended to leave him after the transfers. I asked whether he would testify. His fear returned immediately. If I turn on her, I lose my children. I said, you may lose them by continuing. He left without giving me an answer. Melissa reacted before he could decide. The next day, Ethan called Margaret to report that Internal Affairs had received anonymous screenshots of his messages warning me not to call the police after the break-in. The screenshots made it appear he had obstructed an investigation to protect Ryan. They omitted the messages telling me to preserve evidence and seek legal advice. Only Melissa or Graham could have obtained them. Likely from Ryan's synced tablet, Ethan's suspension deepened into a formal misconduct inquiry. He was ordered not to communicate with me about the case. The move damaged our plan because Ethan could no longer help interpret the federal records or appear as a clean witness. It also revealed Melissa's priority. She was willing to destroy Ethan's career to isolate me. Margaret told me the court could view his involvement as biased, especially if opposing counsel claimed the FBI connection had intimidated Ryan. We would need to win without relying on Ethan's position. Graham also accelerated the financial transfers. Leon detected an attempted login to my brokerage portal using temporary Guardian credentials. The request sought liquidation figures for my remaining company shares and payoff information on the house. Ryan claimed he had not submitted it. Melissa said Graham was merely preparing options. Margaret filed an emergency preservation notice preventing sale or transfer before the hearing. But the judge declined to remove Ryan's temporary authority without testimony. Our trap had worked in one sense: they were moving. Yet they were moving quickly enough to create real damage. Had Margaret filed an hour later, Graham might have initiated a sale order. I realized then that pretending to lose carried the risk of actually losing. Strategy did not make me untouchable. It only gave us a chance to decide where the next blow landed. The final piece came from Graham himself. 2 evenings before the hearing, he returned to collect signatures he claimed were needed for insurance compliance. I pretended to struggle with the pages and asked him to explain each one. Growing impatient, he told Melissa that once the court confirmed permanent incapacity, prior transfers could be treated as actions taken by Ryan on my behalf. The exposure stays with the Guardian, he said. Ryan had entered unnoticed through the kitchen and heard the sentence. He stepped into the dining room and asked, "What exposure?" Graham immediately changed his wording, but Ryan demanded to know why every disputed authorization carried his temporary authority while Morrow Creek belonged only to Melissa. She accused him of becoming paranoid like me. Ryan answered, "Maybe I learned it from watching you." The argument that followed tore through the house, spilling details they had kept separate for months. Melissa admitted she had prepared divorce papers, but she claimed they were a precaution if Ryan's creditors pursued her. She said the Nevada company protected the children. Ryan asked why the Dayton property was purchased with my money and why Graham held the records. Graham ordered them both to calm down. Melissa turned on him and said none of this would have happened if he had moved the accounts faster. The room went silent. She had finally spoken the truth without disguise. Ryan stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Then he looked at me. I remained seated, hands folded, refusing to rescue him even from the realization. Melissa understood too late that she had revealed herself in front of the one person whose cooperation she still needed. She grabbed her purse, told Ryan he would regret choosing a confused old man over his own family, and left with Graham. Ryan stood in the doorway for several minutes. I told him the hearing would proceed and that Margaret would subpoena him if necessary. He asked whether the room had been recorded. I did not answer. He nodded slowly, understanding that silence could now protect me instead of trapping me. "She'll say I planned everything," he said. I told him she might be right about part of it. "You signed. You entered. You stayed quiet." He asked what I expected him to do. I said, "Tell the truth before someone uses it for you." He did not promise. Still, before going upstairs, he placed my office key on the table. It was a small act, legally meaningless, but emotionally larger than any apology he had offered. He had not returned my money, my dignity, or my trust. He had returned access to one room. Sometimes a collapsing structure reveals its first weakness through a single loosened bolt. Margaret spent the next day assembling witnesses. Dr. Ross agreed to testify that he never examined me. Leon prepared the authentication history and server backups. The bank's compliance officer received a subpoena for the transfer logs. 2 independent physicians completed recorded cognitive assessments, showing that I understood my finances. legal rights, family relationships, and the consequences of my decisions. Margaret also requested Graham's licensing records and the filings for Morrow Creek and the Nevada Company. We had no surprise witness waiting to save us. Every piece came from what Melissa and Graham had already touched my accounts. Their companies, the false report, the planted medication, and the cameras they tried to destroy. That mattered to me. I had spent my career believing reliable systems should not depend on miracles. Neither should justice. On the morning of the hearing, the Franklin County Probate Court smelled of floor wax, coffee, and wet wool. Rain followed people through the entrance and darkened the shoulders of their coats. Melissa sat beside her attorney in a gray dress, composed again, her wedding ring still in place. Graham waited behind them with a briefcase on his knees. Ryan sat between their row and mine, physically caught in the position he had chosen emotionally for years. Ethan was absent under orders from internal affairs. Though Margaret carried his sworn disclosure, I took my seat beside her and placed Caroline's walking stick against the table. My hands were steady, not because I believed victory was certain, but because fear had finally become specific. I knew what could be lost, who had tried to take it, and which evidence existed. Before the judge entered, Margaret slid a cream envelope toward me. Inside were the preserved toxicology request, the server confirmation for the camera files, and the complete trust showing equal treatment of both sons. None was new. Together, they formed the path from the attic to that courtroom. Ryan turned toward me. His face looked younger and older at once. I leaned close enough that only he could hear. You still have one chance to tell the truth before someone else tells it for you. He looked at Melissa, then at Graham, then down at his own hands. The courtroom deputy called everyone to rise. As the judge entered, Ryan reached beneath the table and removed the temporary guardian identification card from his wallet. He placed it in front of him, but he did not yet say which side he had chosen. The judge entered, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the temporary guardianship file before calling the matter of Walter Hayes. Melissa's attorney stood first. He described me as a vulnerable widower whose judgment had deteriorated after Caroline's death. He spoke of financial confusion, angry outbursts, unsafe medication use, and the need for family intervention. He played the recording from Ryan's office, cutting it just after my hand struck the table. My voice filled the courtroom. Do not call me confused. Without the break-in, the forged transfers, or the planted bottle, I sounded unstable. Melissa lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment. Ryan sat rigidly in the center row. Graham watched the judge rather than me. I had expected anger to return when I heard that recording. Instead, I felt something colder. They had taken one of the most justified moments of my life and stripped away everything that made it understandable. Melissa testified that she loved me like a father. She described arranging meals, checking medication, and helping with banking after Caroline died. Every act of trust I had once appreciated became evidence that I depended on her. She said the night I went to the hospital, she found me disoriented in the kitchen and feared I had taken the wrong pills. Her attorney asked whether she had ever benefited personally from managing my finances. Never, she said. Everything was for Walter and the family. Margaret did not object. She wrote one sentence on a legal pad and pushed it toward me. Let her commit. Melissa continued, saying Morrow Creek Holdings was an unrelated real estate company formed with marital funds. She denied using my money to buy the Dayton property. Graham gave the smallest nod from behind her. They had decided the safest defense was complete denial. Ryan testified next. Melissa's attorney called him as the concerned son who had reluctantly sought help. He admitted signing the petition and entering my house, but claimed he believed I had approved the search for estate documents. Then the attorney asked whether Ryan still believed I needed protection. He looked toward Melissa. She held his gaze with the same expression I had seen her use during every family crisis: calm, wounded, and expectant. Ryan lowered his eyes to the temporary guardian card on the table. For several seconds, the courtroom waited. I believe my father was manipulated, he said. Melissa's attorney smiled, assuming he meant by Ethan or Margaret. Ryan continued, but not because he lacked capacity, because we used his trust against him. The smile disappeared. Ryan admitted he knew the petition, overstated my condition. He admitted entering the house at midnight and watching Melissa place medication in my bathroom. He also admitted remaining silent because he feared bankruptcy. Melissa's attorney attacked him immediately. He suggested Ryan had changed his story to avoid criminal liability and to punish his wife after a marital dispute. Ryan did not resist the accusation. "That may be part of why I'm speaking now," he said. "I should have spoken earlier." He described Graham's promise that my assets would provide a temporary bridge loan, Melissa's claim that Ethan would inherit most of the trust, and the documents transferring sale proceeds to the Nevada company. He did not portray himself as innocent. That made his testimony harder to dismiss. When asked whether he had personally authorized the disputed transfers, Ryan said no, but acknowledged that his signature appeared on later guardianship paperwork that could have hidden them. Melissa stared at him with open hatred. I understood then that their marriage had ended before any divorce filing. A marriage built on shared concealment cannot survive the first honest sentence. Margaret called Dr. Calvin Ross. He testified that he had never examined me, diagnosed me, or recommended guardianship. He identified his signature on the report but explained that it had been copied from a certification related to Caroline's estate. Margaret displayed both documents side by side. The signature matched precisely, including a small ink flaw near the final stroke. The judge leaned forward. Melissa's attorney argued that clerical error remained possible. Dr. Ross answered that the report included medical conclusions no ethical physician could make without examination. He also testified that several symptoms attributed to me had originally appeared in Caroline's neurological records. Hearing that made something inside me tighten. They had taken the final months of my wife's suffering and repurposed them as a weapon against me. I looked at Melissa. She did not look back. The two independent physicians testified by recorded deposition and written report. Both found me competent to understand my property, relationships, legal rights, and the consequences of financial decisions. One physician acknowledged that I had experienced grief, anger, and a single medication-related episode, but explained that none established progressive cognitive decline. Margaret then introduced the hospital toxicology report. A benzodiazepine-class sedative had been detected, yet no physician had prescribed it to me. The blood sample had been preserved at Margaret's request. The planted bottle carried my name, but the prescribing clinic had no record of treating me. The pharmacy record showed the prescription had been collected by an authorized family pickup. Security footage from the pharmacy showed Melissa at the counter. That footage had been requested weeks earlier. After the bottle appeared in my bathroom, it was not a last-minute miracle. It was the trail she created herself. Leon Burke explained the false email account, recovery number, authentication history, and approved device access. He showed that the account had been created using Melissa's phone number and later connected to Morrow Creek Holdings. The disputed transfers were approved from my home network during times when I was verifiably elsewhere. One occurred while I attended a memorial service in Cleveland. Another occurred during a cardiology appointment, documented by hospital records. Graham's authorization appeared on each transaction. Margaret asked whether someone could have fabricated the entire digital history. Leon said any individual record might be altered, but the same timestamps appeared independently across the bank, internet provider, email service, and brokerage system. 4 systems told the same story. Graham's attorney objected that Leon was implying criminal conduct beyond the guardianship issue. The judge allowed the testimony because it directly affected whether Ryan's petition had been filed in good faith. The bank compliance officer followed. She confirmed that $97,000 left my accounts and ultimately supported the purchase of the Dayton property. Funds moved through Northvale Consulting and Harrow Administrative Services before reaching Morrow Creek Holdings. Margaret displayed the property filing naming Melissa as managing member and Graham as registered agent. Melissa's earlier statement that Morrow Creek was unrelated to my money now sat beside the transfer map. Her attorney tried to argue that the payments were legitimate advisory fees. The compliance officer testified that no contracts or invoices justified them. Graham had labeled several transfers as estate management expenses even though his advisory relationship with me had ended 18 months earlier. The judge asked whether the transactions had triggered internal alerts. The officer admitted they had. but approved device authentication and Graham's professional credentials reduced the risk score. Trust had not merely opened my door. It had instructed the systems not to sound an alarm. Margaret then introduced the complete trust document. It divided the remaining estate equally between Ethan's and Ryan's family lines, with protected education funds for the grandchildren. Melissa had shown Ryan an incomplete summary that omitted those pages. Ryan identified the version he had seen. The judge compared both documents and asked who provided the shortened copy. Ryan pointed to Melissa. She whispered furiously to her attorney. Her motive had always depended on making Ryan believe I had chosen Ethan over him. The full trust exposed that lie without requiring me to say a word. I watched my younger son read the complete section for the first time. His face changed. The betrayal he had committed against me had been built partly on a betrayal committed against him. That did not absolve him, but it removed the last excuse he could use to keep believing his wife had acted for the family. The courtroom video from the night of the break-in played next. The original office camera had been destroyed, but the encrypted server backup remained. Melissa, Ryan, and Graham entered my house with a copied key. Graham asked for the hard drive and trust originals. Melissa discussed the upcoming capacity evaluation. Ryan objected when she placed the bottle in the medicine cabinet, but he did not stop her. The audio was imperfect, yet one sentence came through clearly. Graham said, "Once the evaluation is filed, Ryan can request temporary control." Lauder. Melissa said, "The girls need a home before they need college." Finally, the video showed Graham examining the safe while Melissa photographed documents. Their attorneys argued the recording lacked context. The judge asked what lawful context required entering an elderly man's home after midnight to plant medication. No one answered. Melissa took the stand again against her attorney's advice. Control mattered more to her than caution. She claimed Ryan had designed the plan. Graham had followed Ryan's instructions, and she had acted under pressure to protect her children. Margaret asked why Morrow Creek belonged only to her. Melissa said Ryan's credit was damaged. Margaret asked why she had registered the Nevada company 6 weeks before the guardianship petition. Melissa called it prudent planning. Margaret asked why divorce papers had been drafted before any creditor filed against her personally. Melissa said wives had to protect themselves from unstable husbands. Then Margaret displayed an email Melissa sent Graham after Ryan signs. "The liability stays with him. Move the rest before Walter recovers." The email had been recovered from the same account tied to Morrow Creek. Melissa stopped answering. Her greatest strength had been controlling the story. Now her own words controlled her. Graham attempted a narrower defense. He said Melissa provided all instructions and that he believed I had consented to asset protection. Margaret showed his messages discussing the false medical report and his statement that the original trust documents had to disappear. He claimed that language referred to replacing outdated copies. She then produced licensing records showing he had concealed his personal interest in Morrow Creek while acting under my former credentials. The judge did not decide criminal guilt, but she stated that his conduct raised serious concerns, requiring referral to regulators and prosecutors. Graham's composure finally cracked. He blamed Ryan for signing the petition and Melissa for supplying account access. Melissa laughed once, bitterly, and said, "You told me this was safe." In that moment, the alliance dissolved. Each person who had relied on silence began speaking only to save himself. When Margaret asked me to testify, I walked to the stand with Caroline's cane even though I did not physically need it. I wanted something of hers in my hand. I described the midnight call, the attic, the planted bottle, and the months of financial access I had surrendered after her death. I did not pretend I had been a perfect father. I admitted rescuing Ryan repeatedly and rewarding Ethan for hiding weakness. I admitted allowing Melissa to manage passwords because grief made responsibility feel unbearable. Then I said, "Dependence can be created by kindness just as surely as by force." I taught my sons that I would carry whatever they dropped. One learned to hide what he dropped. The other stopped learning how to carry anything. The judge listened, without interruption. I ended by saying I wanted my legal rights restored. Not revenge disguised as protection. The ruling came after a 40-minute recess. The judge denied the guardianship petition, terminated Ryan's temporary authority, and restored my unrestricted control over property and accounts. She ordered preservation of all related records and referred the matter to the county prosecutor, Adult Protective Services, the state financial regulator, and appropriate federal authorities. She also found there was substantial reason to believe the emergency petition had been supported by fraudulent medical and financial evidence. Melissa's attorney requested a stay. The judge denied it. Graham left the courtroom through a side door with his lawyer. Melissa remained seated, staring at Ryan as though he had stolen something from her. What she had lost was not merely access to money. She had lost the power to define everyone else's reality. Ryan approached me in the courthouse hallway. He removed the temporary guardian card from his wallet and handed it to Margaret, though the court had already voided it. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were too small for what had happened, but they were honest. I told him I would not pay his legal fees, save his company, or ask prosecutors to ignore his actions. His eyes filled. "Are you cutting me out of your life?" I answered. "I'm cutting you out of my finances. Your place in my life depends on what you do without access to them." He nodded. For once, he did not ask what I could do to help. Melissa passed us under escort from her attorney and said, "He'll come back when he needs you." I replied, "That was the old arrangement." She looked at me as if she finally understood the part of the plan she had never considered I could change. The legal consequences unfolded over the next year. Graham lost his license while facing fraud and elder abuse charges. The Dayton property and Nevada accounts were frozen pending restitution. Melissa was charged with conspiracy, identity theft, falsifying records, and financial exploitation of an older adult. She accepted a plea that included prison time, supervised release, and repayment obligations. Ryan cooperated, pleaded to reduce charges connected to the false petition and unlawful entry, and avoided incarceration. But he received probation, community service, and a restitution order. Hayes' restoration collapsed. He sold his house and moved into a rented duplex near his daughter's school. The marriage ended. None of it pleased me. Satisfaction came from stopping the theft, not watching lives break under the weight of choices they had made. Ethan's review lasted 7 months. He was disciplined for failing to report the conflict promptly and for accessing restricted records outside authorization. He kept his job but lost his financial crimes assignment and accepted a transfer to a smaller field office. The first time he visited afterward, he stood in my kitchen without his badge and admitted he had believed competence gave him the right to control information. I told him that was our family disease in different forms. Ryan controlled consequences by expecting rescue. Ethan controlled truth by deciding when others could handle it. I controlled affection with money because writing checks felt easier than having difficult conversations. Caroline had seen all 3 patterns and tried to warn me. We sat with that silence. This time, neither of us rushed to fill it with excuses. I amended the trust with Margaret's help. The grandchildren's education funds remained protected under an independent trustee. Neither son could borrow against them or direct distributions. A portion of my estate went to a non-profit supporting older adults targeted by financial abuse. Ethan and Ryan remained equal residual beneficiaries. But distributions required review and could be delayed if either attempted to pressure me or misuse access. I did not disinherit Ryan. Complete destruction would have been emotionally satisfying for an afternoon and damaging for another generation. I wanted consequences, not inheritance theater. More important, I revoked every shared password, closed old recovery accounts, and hired a fiduciary with no family connection. For the first time since Caroline died, responsibility felt less lonely because it was no longer confused with dependence. I sold the house the following spring. Some neighbors assumed the scandal had driven me away. They were partly right. The place held too much evidence: scratches around the safe, the broken camera mount, and the attic vent through which I had watched my family betray me. But I did not sell under pressure. I chose the buyer, negotiated the price, and signed every page myself. Before leaving, I stood in the attic among Caroline's clothes and the Christmas bins. I found the blue scarf she wore during our last winter together and carried it downstairs. I left the rest for donation. Memory does not require keeping every object. Sometimes it requires deciding which ones no longer get to own the room. My new home was smaller, a one-story place near a lake north of Columbus. Ryan began working as a salaried project supervisor for another contractor. He attended therapy, completed community service, and paid restitution in monthly amounts that often embarrassed him. I never covered a payment. We met for breakfast on the first Saturday of each month. Some mornings were stiff. Others felt almost normal. Trust did not return because he apologized. It returned in inches when he arrived on time, told the truth about setbacks, and did not ask me to fix them. Ethan called every Sunday evening. He no longer gave me edited versions of difficult news. I no longer rewarded composure by pretending pain was weakness. One night, months after the move, rain tapped against the roof while I sat near the front window reading. Ethan called from his new office and asked whether storms still reminded me of that midnight. I looked toward the small attic access above the hallway. Sometimes, I said, but I don't think about hiding anymore. After we hung up, I stood beneath the attic door and listened to the house settle. The world I knew had collapsed 5 minutes after Ethan's warning. But the collapse had exposed something I should have seen years earlier. Family is not protected by hiding consequences, managing appearances, or confusing access with love. I had spent most of my life trying to keep everyone from falling. In the end, the only way to save what remained was to stop standing beneath them.